I found out my own son was planning to have me declared insane. Not sick, insane. Locked away, stripped of my name, my business, my house, everything I'd spent 50 years building with these two hands. I heard it come out of his mouth 3 nights before my 70th birthday, and I was halfway across the hall with every intention of kicking that study door off its hinges when a small, cold hand closed around my wrist in the dark. It was my granddaughter. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even surprised. She just leaned up on her toes and put her lips to my ear and whispered, "Grandpa, don't. I already know." And then she said the thing I still hear when I close my eyes at night. "And it's so much worse than you think. If you've ever been stabbed in the back by the very people you gave your whole life to, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments where you're watching from tonight. My name is Everett Kane. Sit with me a while. Let me tell you how I got my life back. I built boats. That's the plain truth of who I am under everything else. I came out of the Navy in 1976 with 2 years of engine grease under my nails and $1,100 to my name, and I bought a rotted-out boathouse on a mud creek off the eastern shore of Maryland because it was all I could afford and nobody else wanted it. Wexford Creek. You won't find much there but crabbers and herons and the smell of low tide, but I loved it the way you love a woman you shouldn't. I slept on a cot in the loft that first winter with a space heater and a shotgun, and I rebuilt the whole structure plank by plank, and by spring I'd hauled and repaired my first 3 skipjacks for men who paid me in cash and firm handshakes. That was the beginning of Kane Boat Works. 50 years I ran that yard. I put my sweat into every hull that came through it. Somewhere along the line the creek stopped being worthless. The city people discovered the shore. The waterfront went from junk to gold, and my 40 acres of mud and pilings turned into something a developer once offered me $22 million for, sight unseen, just to bulldoze it into condos. I told him to go to hell. I've never once regretted it. My wife's name was Colleen, and she was the softness in a life that didn't have much of it. She kept the books, and she kept me honest, and she raised our boy while I was down at the water 14 hours a day. She died 6 years ago in the spring when the dogwoods were out. I still set 2 cups of coffee on the counter some mornings before I catch myself. There's not a day I don't miss her, and there's not a day I'm not grateful she didn't live to see what her own family tried to do to me. We had 1 child, my son. I want to be careful how I say this next part, because the shame of it still sits in my chest like a swallowed stone. I loved that boy more than my own breath. I taught him to fish and to fillet and to change a fuel filter with his eyes closed. I paid for the college I never got. When he told me he didn't want to work the yard, that he had bigger ideas. I swallowed my disappointment, and I smiled and I said, "Good, be bigger than me." When he married my daughter-in-law, I gave them the down payment on their house without being asked. When their little girl was born, my granddaughter, the light of what was left of my life, I signed over the college fund the day she came home from the hospital. I say all this not to sound like a saint. I say it so you understand the arithmetic. When you give and give and give, some people don't learn gratitude. They learn that the well is deep, and they start wondering what's at the bottom of it. It started, I think, about a year before that birthday. Little things. My son and daughter-in-law began coming around more, which should have made me happy and instead put a low hum of worry in the back of my skull, the way a mechanic hears a bad bearing 3 days before it goes. They started finishing my sentences for me. "Dad, you told us that story already. Dad, you sure you turned the stove off?" One Sunday, my daughter-in-law found my truck keys in the freezer and made a whole quiet production of it, holding them up between 2 fingers with this sad, patient little smile and saying, "Oh, Everett, again?" I had never once put my keys in the freezer in my life. I know that now the way I know my own name. But she said it so gently, so worriedly, in front of my son and my granddaughter, that, just a second. I doubted myself, and that second was the whole game. That's what they were building. Doubt. Not in me, in everyone else about me. They moved my dentist appointment and then told me I'd forgotten it. They'd hide the TV remote and find it for me. My daughter-in-law started keeping a little notebook, just to help you keep track, Everett. Every time I misplaced my glasses, every time I called the dog by the wrong name, every time I got cross about it, down it went in that notebook in her neat little handwriting. I thought she was being kind. I want you to understand. I thought she was being kind. That's the part that still burns. Then my son sat me down last fall and said real gentle, that maybe it was time to think about the future of the yard, that maybe I'd earned a rest, that he could take some of the weight off. He wanted me to sign a power of attorney, just for emergencies, Dad, just in case something happens and someone needs to sign a check. I almost did it. God help me, I almost did. But I'm a boatman, and a boatman learns to read water, and there was something under the surface of that conversation that made the hair stand up on my arms. I told him I'd think about it. He didn't like that. He hid it well, but he didn't like it. And that's when the appointments with the new doctor started. Dr. Sterling, a geriatric specialist they set up in Annapolis. My daughter-in-law drove me herself, both hands on the wheel, worried the whole way. I sat in that office and answered a lot of strange questions. What year is it? Who's the president? Count backward from 100 sevens, and I did fine, I know I did fine, and the doctor smiled at me the whole time in a way I didn't trust. When it was over, he shook my hand and held it a beat too long and said, "We'll get this sorted out, Mr. Kane. Don't you worry about a thing." I didn't understand then why a man would say, "Don't worry" to somebody who wasn't worried. I understand it now. He was talking to my daughter-in-law over my shoulder. Which brings me to the night 3 days before my birthday. I'd gone to bed early. My chest had been tight. An old ticker gives you fair warning, and I'd taken my pill and turned in. But around 11 I woke up parched, and I got up in the dark for a glass of water. The house was dead quiet. That big empty quiet an old house gets at night. All the rooms Colleen used to fill standing dark and cold. I padded down the back stairs in my socks, and I saw a line of light under the door of my own study. My son and daughter-in-law had come by that evening for dinner, and I'd assumed they'd gone home. They hadn't, and they weren't just sitting in my study. They had the door shut, and they were talking low, and my son had his phone lying on my desk on speaker, and coming out of that little tinny speaker was the voice of Dr. Sterling. I should have opened the door right then. Instead, I stopped in the dark hall with my empty water glass in my hand, and I listened, and what I heard turned my blood to creek water in January. The doctor was telling them the report was ready. Moderate to severe cognitive decline, he said, like he was reading a grocery list. Consistent with progressive dementia. I've documented the incidents your wife recorded. The keys, the disorientation, the agitation. It's a strong file. It'll hold up. How strong, my daughter-in-law said, her voice. That's the thing I can't unhear. That soft, worried voice she used on me for a year, and now every ounce of the softness was gone out of it, and what was left was flat and hard and businesslike, like a woman reading a spreadsheet. Strong enough that a judge grants us guardianship, the whole thing, person and estate? With my testimony and the notebook, and one bad public episode in front of witnesses, I'd be shocked if any judge on the shore didn't grant it, Sterling said. Especially at his age. Nobody looks twice at a 70-year-old with a doctor's letter saying he can't manage his own affairs. You'll have full control. He won't be able to write a check, sell a boat, or hire a lawyer without your signature. He'll be a ward of the court. Your ward and the yard, my son said. Once you're his guardian, the yard is yours to manage, Sterling said. You want to sell it, you sell it. You want to move him somewhere and sell it. You do that. A guardian acts in the ward's best interest, and the ward's best interest, I heard him actually chuckle, is whatever the guardian says it is. I heard my daughter-in-law let out a long breath, the kind of breath a person lets out when a thing they've wanted a long time is finally close enough to touch. There's a memory care place outside Salisbury, she said. Sunhaven, locked ward for the ones who wander. Once he's in there, he doesn't come out, and he doesn't talk to anybody we don't approve. The developer's still at $22 million for the waterfront. We take that. We're set for life. Both of us. You're forgetting the girl, my son said, and there it was, my granddaughter, 19 years old, the only one of them worth a damn, and my son said it like she was a line item. I'm not forgetting her, my daughter-in-law said. She's the problem. She's too close to him. She'll fight it. She'll go running to a lawyer the second we file. A pause. Ice cubes in a glass. My scotch. He was drinking my scotch, so we handle her first. Once we have guardianship, we control the trust, and she's still a dependent on paper. We cut her tuition. We cut her off cold. She's got no money and no leverage, and a grandfather who's legally not allowed to help her. She either shuts up and stays in line for whatever we decide to hand her, or she's out on the street. 19, no degree, no daddy's money. She'll fall in line. That's cold, my son said, and I want to be fair to him even now. There was a flinch in his voice. Just enough to prove he still had a piece of a conscience in there somewhere. Not enough to do anything about it. It's practical, she said. You want the money or you want to feel good about yourself? Pick one. They talked another 10 minutes and I stood there through every second of it, and I couldn't move. I want to tell you I felt rage first. I didn't. First I felt grief so heavy it nearly took me to my knees right there in the hall. My boy, my little boy who I taught to swim off the end of the dock. He was standing in my study, drinking my whiskey, planning to lock me in a room and sell the ground his own mother is buried near. Colleen's ashes are scattered off that dock. He knew that. He was going to sell it anyway. Then the rage came, and it was the cold kind, the kind that doesn't shake. I set my empty glass down on the hall table very softly, and I turned to go back up those stairs and get my grandfather's old shotgun out of the closet, and that's when the hand closed around my wrist. I nearly cried out. My granddaughter. She'd come down the same as me for water or for the noise. I never did ask which. She'd been standing behind me in the dark I don't know how long. Long enough. Her face in the little bit of moonlight was white and set, and there were no tears in her eyes, and she pressed one finger to her lips and pulled me by the wrist, quiet as a cat, back up the stairs and into her room and shut the door. "Grandpa," she whispered, "sit down before you fall down." She made me sit on the edge of her bed, and then she told me the thing that changed everything. "I already know," she said. "I've known for 2 months." I stared at her. She went to her desk and pulled out a laptop and a folder, a real paper folder, thick with printouts. And she sat down next to me and she laid it out like she was defusing a bomb, because that's what she is. She's smart in a way I never was. She's got her grandmother's mind and my stubbornness, and it turns out that is a dangerous combination. 2 months ago I heard Mom on the phone, she said. My daughter-in-law. She thought I was at work. She was talking to that doctor about the timeline. I didn't get it at first. Then I started paying attention. The notebook, the keys in the freezer. Grandpa, I saw her put them there. I watched her do it and I didn't understand what I was seeing. The dentist appointment they said you missed? She canceled it herself. I found the confirmation email in the recycling. She opened the laptop. So I started recording. On my phone. Every time they came over. Every time they talked about you. Every time they thought you were out of the room. It's all here. Backed up in 3 places. And Grandpa. She looked at me, this child, my grandchild, with a steadiness that would have made Colleen weep with pride. The doctor's report is faked. He's never done a real evaluation. I looked him up. There are 2 malpractice suits and a complaint pending with the state medical board for exactly this. Falsifying dementia diagnoses for families that want conservatorship. He does it for a cut. Mom's paying him $50,000. I sat there in my granddaughter's bedroom at midnight, 70 years old, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 6 years. I felt Colleen in the room, and I felt, for the first time since I'd heard that flat, cold voice through my own study door, that I was not going to lose. "How much time do we have?" I said. "They're going to file the petition the Monday after your birthday," she said. "The doctors said 1 bad public episode. They're going to do it at the party, Grandpa, in front of everybody. That's the plan. They're going to get you upset in front of 100 witnesses so that when they file, half the county will swear they saw poor, confused Everett lose his mind at his own party. Now, I want to tell you what I could have done, so you understand why I didn't do it. I could have gone to the police that night. But I had no crime yet. Planning isn't a crime you can prove easy, and a good lawyer would have called my granddaughter's recordings a family misunderstanding, and Sterling's report would still exist. And it would have been my word, a confused old man's word, against a doctor and my own son. I could have confronted them at breakfast. But a cornered animal doesn't confess. It destroys evidence. They'd have burned the notebook, and Sterling would have claimed a clerical error, and they'd have simply waited a year and tried again, quieter. No, I'd spent 50 years learning that you don't win a fight by swinging first. You win by letting the other man commit his whole weight to a punch, and then not being where he thought you were. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I went downstairs the next morning and I made coffee and I acted feeble. I want you to understand what that cost me. A proud man playing a broken one in front of the people who broke him. I fumbled my keys on purpose. I called the dog by the wrong name and let my daughter-in-law correct me with that sad little smile, and I saw her write it in the notebook, and I let her. I told my son over breakfast that I'd been thinking about what he said, about taking some weight off, and maybe he was right, maybe it was time. I watched him try not to smile. I told them the birthday party was still on. The whole thing, the tent on the lawn, the crab boil, the bluegrass band, the 100 guests, half the eastern shore. I said I wanted one last big party while I still had my wits about me. My daughter-in-law reached across the table and squeezed my hand and said, "Of course, Everett, whatever you want." And I squeezed back and I smiled, and inside I was made of ice and iron. Because the day I sat down and acted feeble at that breakfast table, my granddaughter had already, at 7 that morning, driven 90 minutes to Baltimore to sit in the office of a woman named Ruth Calloway. Ruth Calloway had been Colleen's college roommate and one of the sharpest estate attorneys in the state before she semi-retired to the shore to sail. I'd known her 30 years, and over the next 72 hours, in secret in her kitchen with the blinds drawn, the three of us built a trap. Not a violent one, a legal one, which, I have learned, is a great deal worse for the kind of people who think the law only protects them. Here is what we did, and I'll say it plain because I want every one of you watching who's got a vulture circling your own family to know it can be done. We took my entire estate, the yard, the 40 acres, the accounts, the house, all of it, and we placed it into an irrevocable trust. Irrevocable. That's the word that mattered. Once it was signed, I no longer owned any of it, which meant no guardian on God's earth could sell it, because a guardian only controls what the ward owns, and I would own nothing, and I named the trustee. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law. I named my granddaughter with Ruth Calloway as co-trustee to keep it clean until the girl turned 21. It was airtight. Ruth had a fresh, independent competency evaluation done that same week by a real specialist she trusted, on video, with 2 witnesses dated and notarized. That stated in plain English that Everett Kane was of entirely sound mind and knew exactly what he was doing. That document alone turned Sterling's report into toilet paper. And then Ruth did one more thing. She quietly forwarded everything. My granddaughter's recordings, the faked report, the record of the $50,000 payment, the whole rotten package, to 2 places. One was the Maryland State Board of Physicians, to the very complaint file already open on Dr. Sterling. The other was a detective in the county's financial crimes unit, a straight-arrow woman named Reyes, who Ruth had worked with before, and who took one look at attempted felony exploitation of a vulnerable adult and moved fast and quiet. We set it all in motion for the day of the party. I wanted them to swing with their whole weight. I wanted witnesses too. Just not the ones they were counting on. The morning of my 70th birthday came up clear and blue with a good breeze off the bay. They put up a white tent on the lawn down by the water. The caterers steamed a mountain of blue crabs, and there was corn and there was cold beer and wash tubs of ice. And the bluegrass band tuned up under the big oak, and by 4 in the afternoon there were near 100 people on my lawn. Old crabbers I'd known 40 years, families whose boats I'd built, the mayor, the fire chief, Ruth Calloway in a straw hat looking for all the world like just another guest, and my granddaughter in a yellow dress, moving through the crowd with her phone in her little clutch bag, calm as still water. My son gave a toast. I knew it was coming. He stood up and tapped a glass and got everybody quiet, and he started out warm. Dad this, Dad that, everything Dad taught me. And I stood there with a beer in my hand, nodding like a sweet old fool. And then he turned, slow and sorrowful, and I watched the knife come out. "But I have to be honest with all of you," he said, and his voice went thick with fake grief. "Because you all love him too. My father hasn't been himself. It breaks my heart to say it in front of everyone, but we can't hide it anymore. He's not well. He's been confused, he's had episodes, he's not safe on his own." A murmur went through the crowd. Right on cue, Dr. Sterling stepped out from beside the tent. He'd been there the whole time, in a blazer with a folder under his arm, wearing his professional face. "We've had him evaluated by a specialist," my son went on. "And we've made the hard decision as a family to take over his care, to protect him, to protect everything he built." My daughter-in-law came and stood beside me and put her hand on my arm, warm and public and loving, and she had papers in her other hand, and she said softly, so the front row could hear how gentle she was, "Everett, honey, we just need you to sign a few things, so we can take care of you." 100 faces looked at me with pity. My whole life's community, watching a proud man be turned into a child on his own lawn. That was the moment. That was the public episode they'd built the entire year around. I let it hang there a second. I made my hand shake. I took the pen. I even leaned down over the little table she'd set the papers on. And I heard my son let out a breath of pure relief, and I heard from off to the side where he thought no one could hear, Sterling murmur to himself, There it is. Then I straightened up and I set the pen down, and I found I didn't have to fake being steady anymore. I let them see it. The ice, the iron, 70 years of a man who slept in a boathouse with a shotgun and built an empire out of mud. I saw the confusion flicker across my daughter-in-law's face. Something was wrong. The old fool wasn't fumbling. "I'm not going to sign these," I said, loud enough for the back of the tent, "because there's nothing left to sign for. There's nothing to take over." "Ruth?" Ruth Calloway took off her straw hat and stepped out of the crowd with her briefcase, and my daughter-in-law's face went the color of ash. Ruth laid it out flat and clear for everyone, that as of 4 days ago the entire Kane estate had been placed in an irrevocable trust, that I owned nothing and therefore no guardian could touch anything, that the trustee was my granddaughter, and that a real, notarized, videotaped competency exam by a board-certified specialist had found me fully sound of mind. "So there will be no guardianship," Ruth said in a voice like a closing door. "There's nothing to be guardian of." My son looked like he'd been hit in the chest with a boat hook, but my daughter-in-law, give the devil her due, she recovered fast. She laughed, a bright, brittle laugh, and turned to the crowd. "This is exactly what we've been dealing with," she said. "He's paranoid, he's been manipulated, he doesn't understand what he's—" "Play it," I said to my granddaughter. The band had a sound system rigged up under the oak. My granddaughter had spent the morning quietly plugging her phone into it. She pressed play, and out over that lawn, over 100 people holding paper plates of crab, came my daughter-in-law's own voice, flat and cold and clear as a bell. "Strong enough that a judge grants us guardianship? The whole thing? Person and estate?" And Sterling's voice. "Nobody looks twice at a 70-year-old with a doctor's letter." And my son's voice, and the yard. And hers again, the words that ended her, ringing out across the water where his mother's ashes are scattered. "There's a memory care place outside Salisbury. Once he's in there, he doesn't come out. We take the 22 million. We're set for life." I have never in my life heard 100 people go so silent. You could hear the halyards ringing on the masts down at the dock. You could hear the water against the pilings. Every face that had looked at me with pity 10 minutes before was now turned toward my son and my daughter-in-law, and the pity was gone and something much harder had taken its place. Sterling was the first to bolt. He got about 4 steps before he stopped short, because coming up the gravel drive unhurried in a plain gray sedan was Detective Reyes and 2 more behind her. She'd been parked at the end of the lane for an hour. She flashed her badge to the crowd, easy and calm, and she told Dr. Sterling that the state medical board and the county would both like a word about a certain falsified evaluation and a $50,000 payment, and she read him the words, "exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and conspiracy, and fraud," and I watched a man who'd made a career out of stealing old people's freedom go the color of spoiled milk. My son didn't run, I'll give him that much. He just stood there in the middle of the lawn with 100 people staring at him, and he looked at me, and for the first time in a year the mask was all the way off, and underneath it was just a scared, small, hollowed-out man, my little boy, and I felt the grief come back on me, sharp as ever. And I want to tell you, I said something cutting and cold, some perfect line. I didn't. I just looked at him and I said, "Your mother's ashes are in that water. You were going to sell it." And he opened his mouth and nothing came out. There was nothing to say. There never had been. My daughter-in-law tried right up to the end to spin it. Started in about elder abuse of a different kind, about how they'd been the real victims, about lawyers. Detective Reyes let her get about 2 sentences into it, and then told her she had the right to remain silent. And I have to say I've never heard 4 familiar words sound so sweet. They didn't put the cuffs on right there in front of everybody. Reyes had the decency to walk them to the cars quiet at the edge of the crowd. But everybody saw, the whole shore saw. There's no coming back from your own voice playing over the speakers at a birthday party. Whatever comes of the charges, and Ruth tells me it'll be years of it. The medical board, the fraud counts, the disbarment for the lawyer they'd lined up. The sentence that mattered was already carried out on my front lawn in front of every person whose respect they ever wanted. They wanted my empire. They walked out of that party owning nothing but their own recorded voices. The crowd stayed. That surprised me. I thought a shame like that would empty a lawn. But those old crabbers and boatmen, they came up one at a time and shook my hand, and some of them had tears in their eyes, and the band, God bless them, after a long minute, struck up something slow and sweet, and the party went on. It went on late, in fact. The moon came up over the bay and turned the water to hammered silver, and I sat in a folding chair at the edge of my own dock, with a beer going warm in my hand. And my granddaughter came and sat down beside me, and she leaned her head on my shoulder the way she did when she was small. "You did that," I told her. "You know that, not me. You saw it when nobody else did. You started recording. You saved my life, kid, and you did it without ever once losing your nerve." She was quiet a while. Then she said, "I kept thinking about what Grandma would have done. I had to look out at the water for a bit after that. I'll tell you what I did the next morning. I called Ruth and I made one change to the trust. I made my granddaughter the sole successor, free and clear the day she turns 21. Everything, the yard, the acres, the house, the money her own parents tried to steal. Because here's what I figured out, sitting on that dock in the moonlight, 70 years old and finally awake. You spend your whole life thinking your legacy is the thing you build. The boats, the business, the ground, it isn't. Your legacy is the one person who'll grab your wrist in the dark and pull you back from the edge, because they'd rather lose everything than lose you. That's the whole inheritance. Everything else is just lumber. I'm still here. I'm still at the yard most mornings before the sun clears the trees, because a man's got to have somewhere to put his hands. My chest gives me trouble now and again, but the doctors say I've got years and I intend to use them. I keep 2 coffee cups on the counter still, and when the tide goes out low and slow off the end of my dock, over the water where I scattered the only person who ever truly had my back until this child came along, I don't feel like a victim, and I don't feel old, and I don't feel like the fool they took me for. I'll leave you with this, and then I'll let you go. Don't ever mistake a gray head for a soft target. Don't ever mistake patience for weakness or silence for confusion. The quiet old man in the corner isn't confused. He's counting, he's remembering. And when the people who thought they were smarter finally commit their whole weight to the punch, they're going to find out he moved out of the way about a year ago and left a trap where they thought his soft spot was. The tide always comes back for what you thought you buried. I learned that on this creek 50 years ago, and I'll believe it till they scatter me off that same dock. My name is Everett Kane, and I'm still standing, and I'm not going anywhere. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, share it with somebody who needs to hear it, and subscribe. Because I've got more of these, and every one of them is true. Take care of yourselves, and keep counting.